Cool. All right. So I guess we can start now that we're live. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Q&A following Ghost Mountain and Keep Saray Home. Thanks for joining us for this conversation. My name is Kevin Lam. I'm the organizing director with the Asian American Resource Workshop, and I use here they pronouns. And yeah, tonight we're joined with the directors of Ghost Mountain and Keep Saray Home, James Taing and Brian Redondo, alongside with Thao from AARW and Greater Boston Legal Services Asian Outreach Unit, Jassyran Kim, who we saw in Keep Saray Home, the daughter of Saray, and Hua, who is also in Keep Saray Home. And so I'll let them introduce themselves first, and maybe we can just do a go around of just you all saying hi, and maybe we can do names again, pronouns, where folks are calling from, and yeah, how you're doing it, and then we can get into it. So maybe Thao, would you, or Brian, would you like to go, and then James? And then...
Sure. Hey, I'm Brian Redondo. I'm the director of Keep Saray Home. Thanks for having me, and thanks to everybody who's able to join us. I'm calling in from the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania right now, having a weekend out here, but I'm from where I live in Brooklyn, New York.
Hi, everyone. My name is James, and I did Ghost Mountain, co-producer and co-director. It was my first time film. I usually came from the financial services industry. Chiming in here from Connecticut, Milford, Connecticut here. But thank you guys for showing our film here at BAAFF, because I did my undergrad in Boston. So it's kind of cool. It's a great homage for me and our team here.
Hi everyone, my name is Thao. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the legal organizing fellow at Asian American Resource Workshop and Greater Boston Legal Services. I'm calling in from Boston today, born and raised. And I just want to thank everyone for having me on this panel today, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
Hi, I'm Hua. I am one of the family in Keep Saray Home. I'm calling in from Lynn, Massachusetts, and thank you for having me on the panel tonight.
Hey everyone, I'm Jassyran. I use the pronoun she, hers, and I am Saray Im's daughter. I'm calling in from Charlotte, North Carolina, just moved here, but originally from Lynn, Massachusetts.
Oh, thanks everyone. Yeah, thanks for joining tonight. Happy to have everyone able to make it. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to just this conversation that we can have together following these two films. So I think we can get started. And I think, after myself personally having watched Ghost Mountain and Keep Saray Home, I think just really seeing the linkage between both of those documentaries that really highlight the experience of Southeast Asian refugees, right? From like resettlement from Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, and that story to kind of what the issues that Southeast Asian community members are facing now upon resettlement to the US. I think it really paints a full picture and narrative about the ways in which Southeast Asian folks are continuing to face displacement, whether it's through war and now through deportation. And so I think the first question we had, I think, is starting with Ghost Mountain and really capturing and documenting the history and experience that often doesn't always get talked about, right? Through the Khmer Rouge and what happened in the war. I think for you, James, I think just wanting to hear from you, what was it like for you to lead on this project, to really be able to document your dad's retelling of his experience escaping the Khmer Rouge as a refugee? And, I think the other question alongside of that is just like, what were some prominent moments for you throughout the experience and or coming out of the completion of this documentary? Just given, I think your father mentioning that's the first time he's ever really telling his story. and things like that, and just the impact that it could have.
Right. Thanks, Kevin. And it's been really rewarding for me. I left the 4 days of my office job to do this film at a more focused length. And so I went into it having sort of this notion of what this story would be like. And the voyage on doing this has completely dismantled that in many ways. I knew that my family was survivors of war and conflict, of a genocide. I sort of got that as a kid when they watched the 1984 film, The Killing Fields. And my parents would watch it and they'd see the scenes of starvation and the bloodshed. And for an audience of that day, that was a very shocking film. There was nothing of that caliber back then. And so my father would say, at the quips of my mother saying, "Oh my goodness," he'd say, "You know, I lived through worse than that." And in this film, you'd have films of Hang Nor, who won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in that, him going through a mass grave of corpses. And there'd be family who would tell me like, "Yeah, you think that's a lot? You wait until you see the next day." And so that really impacted me as a kid, which it really set apart for what my family was, which is very distinguished. However, when I started doing this story, it took on another life of its own, and it just really shook me to the core. And you guys have seen the film, you know, the inhumane indecency that they treated these refugees back then in 1979 is just so unbelievable and appalling. It was something I really did not expect. It was such a surprise. So as I kept doing this film and getting more involved in it, there was just this deep sense of responsibility and obligation that I had to tell this story. And that I couldn't allow it to really fall through the cracks of history. And it was really, I felt the hardship of the victims and the casualties, my father, and also the sort of uplifting stories of compassion by these rescuers at the end. And that really, to put it all in a circle here, all of it's been sort of a maelstrom of sort of this trek and emotion on this. And it's been really such a thrill for me. And I've been very happy that we had a team who really came along and really volunteered their time, who also saw the absolute importance and worthiness of the story. So going back to like prominent like scenes that or moments and experience through this film, one of them I'd really like, or two of them I'd like to highlight was meeting these refugee workers, NGOs, State Department workers, and rubbing shoulders with them really impacted me, because they were people who were extremely selfless and were totally devoted to the work of refugees and to the livelihoods of these displaced peoples. One of them was Bob DeVecchi, who often told a story of when he was graduating Yale. And this is undergrad, and being a graduate of Yale, like the world's your oyster. You can do anything you want. But he didn't know what he wanted to do in life. So he talked to his father over the phone from here in New Haven, Connecticut. And his father said, "You should do what you're willing to die for in life." And he really took that to heart. And as you can see, these people, these NGOs, risked their careers and their lives on the borders of Thailand and Cambodia. Bob DeVecchi saving many boat Vietnamese along the shores. And so that has shaped my thinking and has really put a resolve on me. I think if we all took that to meaning in our lives, we could really examine our world and really think about how we can make it in sort of a better way and make a difference in the world. The last prominent sort of image I have is taking a film crew. This is totally unexpected for me. I didn't know what to expect going to Cambodia. We were just filming. It started off as a story where it was just in a sunroom filming my father, and would snowball over time, and we'd be on the borders of Thailand, Cambodia, and I'll all of a sudden bring a film crew into what you see in the film there, into a minefield. and I just didn't know what to expect. It was incredibly nerve-wracking. Like my heart was just pulsating, and anything could go wrong. It was all unplanned. We just didn't know what was going to happen. Somebody could slip off of one of the trails and fall into an unseen weaponry, or disarm a mine right there, and who knows? Or there could be a skirmish out there. So it was really probably one of the highlights of the entire project for me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, James. And yeah, I think connected to what you were sharing, I think it really connects to, I think, even the next documentary with Keep Saray Home, and just, I think, yeah, this feeling of like folks not feeling able to talk about what happened during the war in Southeast Asia, or wanting to relive that moment because of a lot of the trauma that's been experienced. I think, right, a lot of that just connected to the following documentary is there's also this like linkage of like just stigma and like taboo around talking about like those really difficult experiences. And so, yeah, I think echoing from both of what was shared in Ghost Mountain and Keep Saray Home, I think, is this conversation about refugee resettlement and the experience that Southeast Asian communities had to go through, also falling under the context of human rights violations. And so, as we move from like conversations about the war in Southeast Asian refugee experiences, I wanted to ask you, Brian, for you in the process of like starting the project around this documentary and Keeping Saray Home, I'm asking if you could share a little bit about what was the catalyst for you in really documenting and wanting to bring visibility of the issue of deportations in the Southeast Asian community. And I think, when we're watching the documentary, what Hua and Jassy and other folks, community members who are sharing like really vulnerable and moments and pieces of their life. And so just if you're able to share a little bit about talking through the process of how you've been able to, with community members who are being interviewed, to like build trust and openness and vulnerability to share their story, especially in the presence of a camera.
Yeah, that's kind of a lot to answer. I'll do my best. I think the interest in documenting the story, has a lot to do with everything going on in the world right now. Everything going on with the Trump administration, kind of the outrageous tactics of ICE separating children at the border, putting families in cages, but also the general vilification of immigrants in America, encouraged me to try to capture this story and add some complexity to these issues, and show how they do impact Asian American communities directly. I made a short documentary in 2013 about DACA recipients, Asian American DACA recipients, who they're undocumented students, and each of them in that film are very high achieving, and they told me about kind of the conversation that they feel a little bit of regret in having a hand in creating is the idea of good immigrants, dreamers, who go to college and have lots of potential, and who people fight for to stay in the country, and then how that creates this dichotomy of having those kind of good immigrants, and that must mean that there are also bad immigrants, right? And the types of people who everyone else thinks are deportable, and it doesn't necessarily matter to them how the rest of those kind of immigrants are treated. And so in the greater Boston area, through Kevin, your work at AARW, and the work of Bethany, who's in the film, the lawyer in the film, who was at Greater Boston Legal Services Asian Outreach Unit. The work that you all were doing, suddenly dealing with so many Cambodian and Vietnamese folks in the local area who were facing the threat of deportation at such a rising level, at levels that were unprecedented until now. I really felt like that was something that needed greater attention, and so it's sort of like a confluence of all those things that brought all of us together to tell this story, and so I know that for Jassy and for Hua, it's incredibly more personal than that, right? Their own families are directly impacted. I can't tell you exactly why they were so willing to open up to me. I'm sure they can give their opinion, but I do think part of the process was really getting to know Saray and Hua at a one-to-one level before I even hit the record button on the camera, and just trying to kind of let them know where I was at in making the film, and sort of reassuring them that I was working with other folks in the community, and I think over time we're able to develop an understanding and a trust for them to be able to open up about these issues that most people don't want to talk about. So maybe Jassy and Hua, you can kind of like share what it was like from your side of things.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, that was exactly I think the question I wanted to ask the both of you, Jassy and Hua. I think being so deeply involved in the film, just asking like, what compelled the two of you to be so visible and open in sharing so publicly, both in the film and also in the ways in which both of you have been deeply involved in the organizing that we've done, and like with the rallies and things like that as one piece, and talking with media. So yeah. And yeah, I think Jassy or Hua, whoever would like to.
Sure. Okay. So for me, I decided to participate in the documentary because I want to, show people who my husband truly is, as an individual, a person. I mean, of course, I was nervous about, sort of being visible to ICE, and being on their radar. But I feel that it's really important for us to share our story, to let people know, what a good guy my husband is. He's just a regular, hardworking guy. He's a wonderful husband, a loving father, a good friend. He's, worked really, really hard to build a future for us. So I, want people to see that. And I also want people to, remember that, sometimes people, they, get sort of, they're in the wrong place at the wrong time and make poor decision, but it doesn't, those decisions doesn't define who they are. I mean, in contrast, I think that it help to make them, like those mistakes help to make them a better person. So I want people to see that part.
Yeah, and just to go off of that, so I actually really connected With Brian, because like he said, he got to know my family personally, and the whole thing behind that is I didn't feel like I was being exploited for some other example of another documentary that's thrown out there that's showcasing all the horrible things that are going on with another community. I felt like this one was actually gonna really show like the vulnerable pieces that are happening to my family and countless other ones that like hopefully would make like hit somebody emotionally, like whether the people that can make a difference with that information or whatever it may be. Like that's what I wanted out of the documentary, and so far it has been happening for my family. Because of AARW, we've gotten a lot of more support than we probably would have gotten if we didn't reach out to you guys. And if Brian didn't decide to choose my family to highlight and follow us, we would not have gotten the support that we do have, where we're still fighting till today, but we're in a lot better place than I was a year ago when my dad got his second letter of removal, but just all in all, the reason I decided to really participate was I just wanted everybody to see that this is actually happening, and that regardless of if you're the quote unquote like ideal citizen or whatever it may be, regardless, there's authority out there that can decide whether or not I deserve a father or not. And I have to continuously fight and validate his existence in this country on a day-to-day basis just because of a mistake that he made 20 plus years ago that he's already did his time for. And I really wanted people to understand the gravity of that situation.
Thanks, Jassy. Thanks, Hua. Yeah, and I think both of what you both shared, and also I think just what we were seeing throughout, I think is the groundedness and just making sure that like the documentaries and the stories that are being told are definitely from communities that are impacted and community centered, right? Like through like AARW's work around deportation, I think partnering with the Asian Outreach Unit, really wanting it to be from a community organizing and community lawyering model. And I think even Brian, as you were speaking about the ways in which building that trust and vulnerability with Hua and Jassy, I think a lot of it is also this centering of like people beyond just seeing them as like the issue. And so, right. And I think even with that, I think the theme runs across to even Ghost Mountain of, James, your father, not just being like a Cambodian refugee, but that there's more to his life than just that as well. And so, I think in the conversation about like the work and like what is happening now, I wanted to pass it to you, Thao, to see if you could share a little bit more, because we know that while these films really uplift and highlight the individual experiences of folks in our community, that we know that it's a broader narrative that also runs across and parallels other community members from around like refugee resettlement experiences and facing deportation. So wondering if you could share a little bit more about the work that both AARW and GBLS have been doing to respond against deportations in the Southeast Asian community and how folks can get involved.
Thanks, Kevin. So AARW and GBLS, which is where Asian Outreach is at, have been working to fight against deportations within the Southeast Asian communities, locally and nationally for the past several years. And it's kind of like a two-pronged approach. So through both like the legal aspect and also the community organizing strategy. So for some individuals, we fight to make the criminal case such that criminal records are not the basis of their deportation order anymore, whether that's through the processes like the post-conviction relief or through governor's pardons. And in the past year, actually, 3 of our community members that we've been working with have actually won post-conviction relief, which basically means that they can live their lives without having to be afraid of the threat of deportation any longer. And these victories, they keep our community members safe, and they even help bring folks like T, who you saw in the documentary, back to the United States and reunite with their family and friends. But we know that like resistance definitely needs to also occur outside of the legal system as well. And prior to COVID, we rallied for folks as they went into their ICE check-ins. We kept our community members safe and made sure that ICE knew that we were holding them accountable to their actions. And we also held community forums to keep folks informed through any updates that we would hear. But more than anything, we also make sure that our community members' needs are met outside of their deportation cases, especially because the implications of having an impending deportation case can affect such large aspects of your lives, not just with that one deportation issue, right? So since the pandemic, we've seen things like we've been working to distribute funds, and we've been connecting folks with food assistance, benefits, and work permits. That way folks can have and be ensured that they can have like a secure life outside of this deportation threat. And actually right now we are working to fundraise for T and his family to help secure permanent housing for them. So if folks are willing to like participate, they can plug in through the T's fundraiser online. If folks can't see the link, it's bit.ly/T's home, THYS, and then home, HOME. That could be one way for folks to plug in that is very immediate and also directly benefits one of our community members. But through it all, we also work with organizations and community members to both strategize how to defend our communities and also how to work towards a more just society where our community members are granted another chance and are given the resources to make those hopes for a better life an actual reality for them.
Thanks, Thao. And yeah, I think, thanks for sharing all of that. And I think, I think just to acknowledge, right, like that we are in the midst of a pandemic still, and that, yeah, as Thao was raising and other folks have raised, like with folks facing deportation, that like deportation hasn't been the only issue impacting folks' lives. And just that with, in the midst of the pandemic, yeah, with T coming back just a couple of weeks prior, and then the pandemic hitting, really seeing the ways in which this pandemic has really deeply impacted not just Southeast Asian communities, but other communities of color. I was wondering, and this is open to everyone who would like to respond, but I've been, as we've been seeing the pandemic unfold, we've definitely seen a rise in the movement to defund police. And so I just wanted to ask folks if folks had any thoughts or reactions and responses to really understanding that in this moment, as there's a huge push to defund police, and especially in the midst of a pandemic, and seeing the ways in which the current structures haven't been really supporting and benefiting those who are most impacted. In those conversations, like what are the ways in which folks have seen the movement to defund police, as also linking to some of the conversations around the movement to defund ICE and DHS?
Thanks for asking that, Kevin, because I think like we are talking about fighting for our community members, and defunding police and abolishing ICE and the Department of Homeland Security are so intertwined and so integral to the fight for a more just world for all of our communities, right? So like we think about how Southeast Asian folks, a lot of them were resettled into communities that were so underfunded and under-resourced and didn't really have that structural support needed to reintegrate into a whole new country, and as a result, like this lack of support, like much like with other Black, Indigenous, and people of color, they were subjected to systemic marginalization. And at the same time, as folks were resettling into new country, we also see a rise in policies that really targeted Black and Brown communities. They underfunded state benefits programs, they expended funding for the police, and they made it much easier to deport immigrants. So we see money going into systems that do more harm for communities of color, while systems that would support Southeast Asians and other Black, Indigenous people of color are losing money. And, these like, as a result, like a lot of Southeast Asian community members were forced to commit crimes of varying degrees in order to survive. And these crimes are mainly the reason why ICE is targeting Southeast Asian communities today. So we see here like an interaction between the criminal and the immigration system, which double penalizes our community members for not having the support that was needed for folks to resettle, and also threatening them because of this and by forcibly uprooting Southeast Asian communities to countries that they may have never, they haven't built their lives at, And, both ICE and police, they perpetuate harm and violence in our communities, especially for Black, Indigenous people of color, and Southeast Asian immigrants. And the calls to defund ICE and police are ways in which folks are fighting against community harm and violence and are working to build stronger communities. So, the fight against Southeast Asian deportations, it does go hand in hand with the fight for Black liberation and with the fight against structural violence against Black, Indigenous people of color in general. So in order for there to be justice for our communities, I do think that we need to fight for all of our communities, and that starts by calling for the defunding of police and abolishing ICE simultaneously.
Oh, thanks, Thao. Yeah, I don't know if any other folks want to respond to that question or respond to Thao's response. Cool. Well, yeah, I think thanks again for everyone for sharing. I think, yeah, we got one question from folks who were watching through Facebook and YouTube. That question was specifically in, I think, Keep Saray Home, just folks wanting an update around Saray's last ICE check-in, given that the way that the film closed out was that his next check-in would have taken place earlier this month, and if that happened and how it went. And then, yeah, that was the main question. And then other folks just expressing a lot of gratitude to the filmmakers and all community members and everyone here for speaking, and just that how your stories had resonated with them as well. And so, yeah, I don't know, Jassy, if you want to share an update or give a quick update.
Yeah, so he did. It was a Zoom court meeting, interesting enough. And what ended up happening is that I don't know the court date specifically, but we do have another court date to basically start the process or deciding on the process of whether or not his charges will be vacated, which would help, make him not deportable anymore. It would take him off the deportation list. So we're definitely in a better direction than we were before. And that's literally all thanks to the work of AARW, Brian highlighting us in the documentary, and definitely, the Greater Boston Legal Services. The support group has definitely allowed us to get this far. And, I cannot be thankful enough because now I get to, have a little bit more time with my dad.
Oh, thanks, Jassy. Thanks for that update. And yeah, I think maybe we can move into just closing remarks. And yeah, I think just for everyone to get a chance to just share for folks, given the work that everyone is doing and the mass public outreach and audience that, through the films and through the organizing that folks are doing, what are you hoping that those folks who are watching or kind of consuming your content and watching the documentaries or involved in the organizing, what do you want them to take away? And then also any messages that you hope for them to walk away with from watching these documentaries or even from some of the organizing? And anything else you want to share before we close out?
I'll go ahead. Something that I've been thinking about during this discussion is just the need to speak up and tell our own stories. Thinking about James's film Ghost Mountain, what are the odds that his dad would even share that kind of story with another filmmaker, right? It took family, it took his own community to bring that out. And, I would argue the same about Hua and Jassy's family and T's family. it sort of like takes all of us to encourage one another to speak those truths and to be forward about them in a way that can uplift all of us. And there's a line that I ultimately cut out of Keep Saray Home that Hua says, that she did say to me on camera. And it stuck with me, even though I didn't ultimately use it in the film. She said that, at some point she just realized that in order to help ourselves, she has to tell her story. And so I think that's a takeaway for all of us who are not only storytellers, but people active in our local communities.
Thanks, Brian, for calling out my film here. And I think you highlight what I've learned throughout being a first-time filmmaker is the craft of storytelling and how powerful that is, because they really convey a truth about something. And I think thematically, I'm gonna touch on the need for human rights and to really stand up against violations of that. And we should continue to ask, why is human dignity important to us? And there are tangents of our film that we couldn't quite capture, but there were many unsung heroes who were so important in really saving refugees' lives. And I think they serve as an emblem for how to deal with things going forward. David Miliband at the end of our film, who's the president of our International Rescue Committee, says, we need to get better at peacekeeping and peacemaking. And that's the only way we're gonna take care of our issues, especially regarding refugees and war and conflict overseas. And the story of my father really falls in a time where the United States was a losing country in a war, the Vietnam War. It was an ugly mess. And there is no reason for the United States to go and help victims of the war. That's never happened before in history. That's unfounded. Yet you find a bunch of trailblazers and mavericks who did such. And for much of the case, I feel very strongly that they prevented further catastrophe from outspilling throughout Southeast Asia. And people in your film and people from Southeast Asia benefited from this, and they were able to come through the United States through these resettlement programs in which these State Department workers, these volunteers established back then. So I think it shows, it's a part of American history that I felt was buried and should be part of our legacy that we really admire and we uphold and we carry with us as a lesson for us going forward. It's one which we shouldn't solve our foreign policies with bombs and bullets, but really with compassion and aid. And I think that's really the best way looking forward.
Thanks, James. Yeah, Hua, Jassy, or Thao, any other closing thoughts or remarks?
I guess I'll go. I guess one thought that lingers with me is how powerful community is, and how I think in both documentaries there are communities that form. I'm thinking of like in Ghost Mountain, how folks in the refugee camps, they still found ways to, be together and unite with one another, even though like there's so much doubt, there's so much fear going on. And I see also in Keep Saray Home how like the organizing itself has created like a form of community that continues to empower folks to tell their stories and to make these stories heard. So I guess I'm just left with the thought that community really lights the spark for resilience against all odds, and that there is a never-ending hope for change. And I'm just so grateful to be here in everyone's presence today. So thankful to be here with everyone.
I think that's it. Yeah, I know that at 9 the debate is coming up, and yeah, just as a right, like we're in an election year, and so I think in this conversation about immigration, deportation, and the impact on like these issues around on immigrant refugee communities. I think the framing around that is that while immigration is often seen as like a federal issue, that there's actual like ways to really shift that narrative and also to create change at the local city state level, whether that's through film or other strategies. And I think I think just wanting to wrap up so folks can also like tune into the debate, and that like I think reminder for folks to like go early vote or vote. And that, I think we're seeing, especially in this year, that there's increased attack on immigrants and refugees and people of color in the midst of a pandemic, right? And so I think just remembering that even with everything going on, that there's still things that can be done at the city and state level, and that we're also seeing that there's a lot of retaliation happening right now on folks who are speaking out in some ways, but that community members are continuing to organize and resist. And so, I think I think if folks are interested in getting involved, I think connecting with AARW or groups in their local area who are doing this work is great. But I think thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks Brian, James, Hua, Jassy, and Thao for sharing and taking time out of tonight to speak.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.